It was a summer night last year, after I finished my part-time job and was heading home. Back then, I didn't have a driver's license, so I diligently pedaled my bicycle to work every day. Though I was young, juggling a full day of school followed by a late-night shift was exhausting. The place where I worked was a bustling restaurant, always packed with customers, so after each shift, I'd head straight home drained. On my way back, just a few minutes by bike from the restaurant, there was an underground tunnel. This tunnel was infamous locally for its eerie, ghostly rumors. It was long, with a curve in the middle, making it impossible to see the exit from the other side while inside. The tunnel was also notorious for frequent traffic accidents due to poor visibility. I figured that was probably why it had such a spooky reputation. But I wasn't someone with a sixth sense or particularly sensitive to supernatural things, so I wasn't too scared. Because of that, I didn't think much of it and passed through the tunnel every day on my way home. That is, until one night when I got off work much later than usual. As I stepped up to my bicycle to leave, I discovered that both the front and rear tires were punctured. It made me furious and frustrated. This was an expensive bike, and I was worried it might get vandalized further, so I decided to walk it home. As I trudged along, I muttered to myself, why today of all days? I'm already exhausted, and now this? Just my luck. While I was grumbling, I noticed the air around me at some point had grown colder. Oh, I realized I'd reached the entrance to the tunnel. I didn't think much of it and started walking my bike through. But once inside, I realized walking through the tunnel felt completely different from my usual impression. I hadn't expected it to feel so much longer than when I rode through on my bike. This made me feel a bit uneasy. Still, shortly after entering the tunnel, I saw a woman riding a bicycle toward me from the opposite direction. Seeing someone else in the tunnel in the dead of night made me feel a little more at ease. But as the woman passed by, she noticed me pushing my bike and seemed startled. Her face showed clear shock. It wasn't entirely surprising, though seeing someone walking a bike in a tunnel like this in the middle of the night would naturally catch someone off guard. Though her reaction felt a bit offensive, I kept moving forward slowly. As I walked, I thought to myself, is the exit on the other side really this far? Just as that thought crossed my mind, a piercing screech of brakes echoed through the tunnel, followed by a loud crash. The sound made me jump, and in an instant, cold sweat broke out all over my body. The noise seemed to come from behind me. It must have been the woman who just passed me. She might have been in an accident. Worried, I immediately set my bike against the tunnel wall and hurried back the way I'd come. I ran past the curve and reached the tunnel's entrance, but the road ahead was completely empty. There were no vehicles, no sign of the woman who just passed me, nothing. For a moment, I stood there dumbfounded in the empty tunnel. I tried to reassure myself. I'm probably just exhausted and imagining things. So I turned back to retrieve my bike. As I walked, I couldn't stop thinking, that loud crash, did it have something to do with the woman on the bike? She clearly passed me just moments ago, so how could she have disappeared so quickly? The more I thought about it, the more a creeping sense of fear took hold. With that, I grabbed my bike and started walking faster toward the exit. But just as I was about to step out of the tunnel onto the wide street beyond, I felt a sharp tug on my hair. The force was so strong it yanked me back a few steps in an instant. At the same time, a damp, musty smell filled the air behind my head, sharp and pungent. Terrified, I didn't dare look back and instead hurried out of the tunnel as fast as I could. Eventually, I made it home safely. But when I calmed down and thought back on what had happened, a chill still ran through me. Because of that experience, I've avoided that tunnel ever since, taking a longer detour instead. Though I've since quit that part-time job and no longer need to pass by the tunnel, every time I ride by that area, I can't help but recall that terrifying night. It was early summer 3 years ago, just after the rainy season had ended, and the cicadas had begun their incessant chirping. At the time, to expand my business, I had rented a new office space. The office was located on the second floor of a 5-story building. A few days after we settled in, a female employee in the company mentioned something unsettling. She said, when I was alone in the office, the door opened by itself. I thought someone was coming in, but there was no one in the hallway. Our office door was equipped with a bell that chimed ding ding dang dang whenever it opened. She explained that the bell had rung, but when she looked, no one was there. She stared at the empty hallway for a moment before returning to her work. The employee admitted it was a bit creepy, but since it happened during the day, it wasn't too alarming. A few months later, however, something far stranger happened. One late night, I had urgent work to finish, so I headed to the office. When I arrived at the building's entrance, the daytime bustle had completely vanished. The building was enveloped in the stillness of the night. I took out my key, unlocked the main door on the first floor, and stepped inside. I flipped on all the lights, the ones at the entrance, the staircase, and the hallway, before heading up to the second floor office to get my work done. For some reason, as I settled in, a random thought crossed my mind. It'd probably be nice to check out the night view from the rooftop right now. So I took the elevator up to the 5th floor and climbed the final set of stairs to the rooftop. I lit a cigarette, took a drag, and gazed out at the city lights, thinking to myself, this view is really something. It'd be great to have a barbecue up here. A few minutes later, I heard the sound of the elevator door opening. I wondered, did the security company send someone to check because the lights are still on? With that thought, I walked over to investigate, but there was no one by the elevator. At that moment, the memory of what my employee had said came rushing back, and a chill ran down my spine. Deciding it was time to leave, I took the elevator back down to the 2nd floor, entered the office, and turned off the hallway lights. Then I walked down the stairs to the 1st floor. The building's rules required that after using the elevator, it had to be returned to the 1st floor. So when I reached the ground floor, I approached the elevator and prepared to press the button to bring it back down. That's when I noticed the floor indicator showed the elevator was on the 5th floor. I was puzzled. I had just taken the elevator from the 5th floor to the 2nd, then walked down the stairs. The elevator should have been on the 2nd floor, not the 5th. It was strange, to say the least. Though I was starting to feel uneasy, I pressed the call button to bring the elevator back to the 1st floor, determined to follow the rules. As I turned to head toward the staircase to turn off its lights, I heard the unmistakable sound of high heels clicking rapidly down the stairs from above. Fear gripped me instantly. An indescribable, bone-chilling sensation shot up my spine, making my skin prickle with goosebumps. My heart pounded in my chest. In that moment, I felt an overwhelming sense of danger, as if something was charging down the stairs toward me. Panicked, I bolted for the main entrance, fumbling to turn off the entrance lights before crouching down to lock the door from the outside. It was a simple task, but in my state of panic, I struggled to get the key into the lock. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, I managed to secure the door and let out a sigh of relief. But just as I did, I noticed something through the glass door, a pair of feet in high heels standing right in front of me, inside the building. Before I could process it, a loud crash rang out from the glass above my head. Instinctively, I looked up toward the source of the noise and immediately regretted it. There, pressed against the glass door, was a woman. Her hands were splayed against the glass, and she wore a smile that looked eerily like a no-mask, frozen and unsettling, as she stared down at me through the door. In a state of utter terror, I ran. The next day, I asked the building's owner about it. He told me, it's probably the woman who used to work in the office on the 5th floor. She made frequent mistakes at work and was constantly reprimanded. She'd often go up to the rooftop to cry. Eventually, unable to handle the pressure, she tied a rope to a light fixture at the staircase's turn on the 2nd floor and took her own life. That was the horrifying experience I had in that building. Though I still rent the office there and often work late into the night, I haven't encountered that terrifying woman again since. When I was about 9 years old, my parents got divorced. After the divorce, my mother took me and my older sister to live in the suburbs. It was a rural area in Saitama Prefecture, close to the border with Gunma, an incredibly remote place. Back then, my mother rented an old, single-story wooden house in an area where ours was one of only 2 homes, ours and that of an elderly couple living across the road. Beyond that, there were nothing but fields stretching into the distance. The house was old, with a musty smell and a slightly eerie, gloomy atmosphere, but after my mother cleaned it up, it actually felt quite cozy. To support my sister and me, My mother worked at a factory during the week and took on a part-time job at a nearby supermarket on weekends. This meant that on weekends, it was usually just my sister and me at home. Sometimes, at my mother's request, the elderly couple from across the road would come over to keep us company. Life went on like that for a little over 2 months. One weekend, with my mother at work, it was just my sister and me at home. That day, I was in an especially cheerful mood. I ran around the front yard, playing wildly, full of energy. Suddenly, I heard someone call my name. The voice came from the direction of the front gate. I thought to myself, is that the old lady from across the road? Excited, I ran toward the gate to see who it was, but when I got there, no one was outside. Confused, I stood there for a moment, and then I heard my name being called again, this time from the side of the house. It was my mother's voice, and it sounded cheerful, almost playful, as if she were teasing me with a laugh. I darted toward the corner of the house, but when I rounded it, there was no one there. Just as I stopped, puzzled, the voice called out again, this time from the back of the house. I immediately chased after it, but every time I turned a corner expecting to find someone, there was no one there, and the voice would promptly call out from another side of the house. I ran around the house several times, chasing the voice, until it suddenly hit me. My mother was at work. The realization made me freeze. At that exact moment, the voice that had been relentlessly calling my name stopped. Then, abruptly, the voice seemed to move inside the house, coming from somewhere within. Though I felt a twinge of unease, I stepped inside to track down the source of the sound. The voice seemed to be coming from the back bedroom. It kept calling me, persistent and clear. Eventually, I traced it to the last room down the hallway, a plain, unoccupied room used as a storage space. Standing in front of the door, I remembered again that my mother was at work. A wave of fear washed over me. Just then, the voice changed. It became strange and chilling, like an old cassette player running out of batteries, slowing down and growing deeper, the tone shifting into something sinister and almost grotesque. It no longer sounded like my mother's voice. It felt malicious, like it carried an evil intent. For reasons I couldn't explain, despite my fear, I felt compelled to open the door. I needed to know if my mother was somehow inside. As my hand reached for the doorknob, a hand suddenly grabbed me from the side. I jumped, my heart racing. It was my sister. She looked at me with a serious expression and told me to step away from the door. I obeyed immediately. She pulled me along, and we ran together to the living room. Once there, I was trembling, unsure of what to do. I told my sister everything that had happened. She said she hadn't heard any voices, but she felt something unsettling, like something terrifying had entered the house and was lurking just behind that door. Later that day, the elderly couple from across the road came over. My sister recounted the incident to them, and they called my mother to tell her what had happened. That evening, the couple brought someone from a local shrine to our house. I'm not sure what kind of ritual they performed in the yard, but afterward, they placed some objects by our front door. The person from the shrine told us, "You won't hear that voice anymore. If you ever hear strange sounds again, don't listen closely or respond to them." After that, I didn't hear the voice again. Years later, when I was in 5th grade, something else happened. One day, as my sister and I returned home from school, we found that our house had been burglarized. The objects the shrine had placed by our door were smashed to pieces. That night, my sister and I heard the terrifying voice again. It was outside the front door, using our mother's voice to call our names relentlessly. We huddled together, trembling, listening to the voice while staring at our mother, who was asleep beside us, until the sound finally faded away. A few days later, on a weekend, my mother unexpectedly took a day off from her part-time job and told us to pack our things. That afternoon, she hurriedly moved us out of the house. After we settled into our new home, we never experienced anything strange again. When I grew older, my sister and I asked our mother why we had moved so suddenly back then. She looked uncomfortable and told us that a few nights before we moved, she had gotten up in the middle of the night to use the bathroom and glanced out the window. She saw something terrifying standing outside the front gate. She refused to say what it was, no matter how much we pressed. I remember that whenever my sister and I brought up the strange things we'd experienced in the old house in front of our mother, She would always tell us to stop talking about it and to forget those things. I think she was trying to protect us. Perhaps she was afraid that talking about it would draw that thing back to us. Whatever that terrifying thing was, I believe only my mother, who saw it with her own eyes, truly knows. When I was about to start 4th grade, during that summer, my parents sent my older sister and me to spend the holidays at our grandparents' house in the countryside. My grandparents ran a small general store in a rural village, which, to me as a child, was like paradise. On top of that, my grandparents weren't overly strict with us. Honestly, the freedom to snack as much as I wanted and explore to my heart's content was way more fun than staying home watching TV. So during that time, I spent nearly every day running around and playing with the neighborhood kids. Like that, the summer vacation passed joyfully, nearly halfway gone. One evening, while we were having dinner, my grandfather gave us a warning. In the coming days, there will be frequent afternoon showers. So whether the weather's good or bad, you need to bring an umbrella if you go out. We took his words to heart. However, one day, some neighborhood kids invited me to play at a temple farther away than usual. Excited, I slipped on my shoes and rushed out to join them. As we walked and chatted, I noticed all my friends were carrying umbrellas. That's when I realized I'd forgotten mine. But the weather was clear and sunny, so I figured it wouldn't rain. Too lazy to go back, I brushed it off and continued with my friends to the temple. We played for a while, but then I noticed the sky growing dark and ominous. Since I didn't have an umbrella, I was worried about getting wet and getting scolded when I got home, so I told my friends I'd head back early. One of my friends, looking a bit concerned, offered to lend me his umbrella. Stubbornly, I replied, "I'll probably make it back before it starts raining." Without waiting for his response, I took off running toward home. But halfway there, the sky opened up and rain began pouring down. I quickly darted into a rundown old bus stop nearby to take shelter. Looking up at the sky, I thought, this rain is so heavy. What am I going to do? I figured my friends would pass by soon, and if the rain didn't stop, I could walk back with them. So I stayed at the bus stop, sitting on the bench, waiting for either the rain to let up or my friends to arrive. As I waited, I started feeling drowsy without realizing it. My eyes grew heavy, and I began to drift off. Just as I was slipping into a hazy state, I suddenly heard a voice calling, "Little one, little one." It seemed to be calling me. I snapped my eyes open and saw a woman standing just outside the bus stop. She was wearing a red dress and holding an old, tattered red umbrella. Smiling, she asked, "You don't have an umbrella, do you? Let me walk you home." Overjoyed, I thought, I'm saved. I eagerly accepted her offer, told her where my grandparents' house was, and we set off together. As we walked, the woman held the umbrella over us and began talking about the kids who lived nearby. But something felt off. I didn't recognize any of the children she mentioned. I'd never seen or heard of them before. Then she asked, "You're from the Fujita family, right?" I thought to myself, she seems to know the people around here well, so it's not surprising she knows I'm a Fujita. But then she kept asking about my family, one question after another. I didn't think much of it and chatted with her about my family as we walked. After a while, she said in a cheerful tone, "It's been a long time, but I once walked another Fujita kid home. That child was very smart, but sadly too smart for their own good, not very obedient. If they'd listened, they could have had another friend. But you seem like a good kid." As she spoke, she licked her lips and glanced at me, her eyes glinting in a way that felt unsettling and strange. I started feeling uneasy. After all, my family only had me and my sister, no other kids. When had there been another Fujita child? After that, we walked in silence. The rain grew heavier, so intense that I could barely see the path ahead. The woman broke the silence, saying, "The rain's getting worse. Let's hurry." She grabbed my hand and started running, pulling me along. Her grip was surprisingly strong, and I had no choice but to keep up. I don't know how long we ran, but my body started feeling exhausted and uncomfortable. Just when I thought I couldn't go on, the woman stopped abruptly. I collapsed into a crouch, gasping for breath, nearly vomiting from the exertion. She looked at me and said, "We're home." I looked up and realized we were in a forest, standing in front of a strange, dilapidated house. Confused, I thought she must have made a mistake and brought me to the wrong place. I told her, "This isn't my house." Calmly, she replied, "From now on, it will be." Her words stunned me. As my mind went blank, the woman opened the front door of the house. The interior was pitch black, like an abyss where nothing could be seen. Then, from deep within the darkness, I heard the faint cries of children screaming, "Help!" The bizarre situation left me frozen. The woman slowly turned to face me, her expression softening into a gentle smile as she said, "Go inside and play with the other kids." Terrified, I immediately refused. The moment I did, her face twisted into a ferocious scowl, and she shouted at me in a furious, guttural voice, "This is your home now. From now on, you'll stay here. You can't leave." Her outburst left me dazed with fear. As I turned to run, she lunged and grabbed my throat. Her grip was suffocating, lifting me off the ground. Pain surged through me, and I couldn't breathe. Just as I thought I was going to die, I suddenly opened my eyes. I was back in the bus stop, and the rain was still pouring outside. Realizing it had all been a nightmare, I thought, that dream felt so real, terrifying. I calmed myself down, listening to the sound of the rain, but drowsiness crept over me again, and I closed my eyes to rest. The moment I did, I heard that woman's familiar voice calling softly from outside the bus stop. In an instant, goosebumps covered my body. This time, I knew it wasn't a dream. Paralyzed with fear, I didn't dare move and pretended to be asleep, ignoring her. The calling stopped. Unsure if she was gone, I cracked my eyes open, just a sliver to peek through. I saw a vivid red figure approaching. Panicked, I squeezed my eyes shut, pretending to sleep. Soon after, damp, musty smell filled the air right in front of me. I could sense her face hovering close, staring at me. In my mind, I kept praying, "Please, just go away." I stayed frozen, gripping my fear tightly. After what felt like an eternity, the musty smell faded, but I still didn't dare open my eyes. Eventually, I fell asleep. I was jolted awake by my friends calling my name nearby. Opening my eyes, I saw them standing beside me and breathed a sigh of relief, feeling saved. The rain had stopped. I walked home with my friends. That evening, it suddenly started pouring again. Before bed, my sister and I sat by the window, watching the rain and chatting. By chance, I glanced out and saw, under the faint glow of a distant streetlight, a figure holding a red umbrella slowly walking toward our house. Seeing that figure, fear gripped me. I thought, is that the woman with the red umbrella? Is she coming for me? I quickly stepped away from the window, told my sister I was going to bed, and dove under the covers. That night, I fell asleep trembling with fear. The next morning, my grandparents woke my sister and me. With a troubled expression, my grandfather asked, "Did you meet a woman with a red umbrella?" I honestly recounted everything that happened the previous day. After hearing my story, my grandparents grew visibly anxious. They immediately told my sister and me to pack our things to return to Tokyo. Though I didn't fully understand what was happening, I could sense from their reaction that encountering that woman was a deeply serious matter. Later, my mother drove to pick us up. As we left, my grandmother gave us a strange talisman inscribed with a character for hidden, blessed at a temple. She instructed me to always carry it during rainy weather. Then we returned to Tokyo. Back home, I told my family what had happened. My father sternly ordered me to carry the talisman every day and forbade me from ever speaking of the incident again. From that day on, until I grew up, I was banned from visiting my grandparents' house. Instead, every year during the holidays, my grandparents came to Tokyo to celebrate with us. My grandmother always brought new talismans for me. When I was older, I asked my father about the woman with the red umbrella. He finally told me that the village had a dark history. The woman was a vengeful spirit who harbored hatred toward the village and took its children, bringing suffering to its people. He said that when he was young, several of his friends were taken by her and disappeared. He too had encountered her. It had also been a rainy day. My father was running home through the fields when a woman with a red umbrella appeared, offering to walk him home. He agreed. He couldn't recall where they went, only that he followed her in a daze. When they reached a strange mountain, a voice told him to turn back, snapping him out of his trance. The woman was pulling his hand, about to lead him onto a dark mountain path lined with weathered Jizo statues. He glanced at her hand. Her skin was gray, cracked, and crawling with insects. Terrified, he broke free and ran. As he fled, the woman chased him, her face twisted in rage, screaming, "Don't run." He didn't know how long he ran, but when the rain stopped, she vanished. He told my grandparents, who contacted a temple. The temple said there was no other way but to take the child out of the village and ensure they carried a talisman until adulthood to avoid being found. My father said that even after leaving the village to live with relatives, before he grew up, he would dream of the woman with the red umbrella on rainy nights. She'd stand far ahead, her back to him, then suddenly turn and charge toward him, causing him to wake in a panic. Those nightmares haunted him until he reached adulthood, when they finally stopped. Hearing my father's story, a cold sweat broke out on my forehead. I remembered what the woman had said. I once walked another Fujita kid home. She was talking about my father. Though I didn't have recurring nightmares like he did and grew up safely to this day, whenever it rains, I recall that woman's terrifying, ferocious face. Especially on rainy nights when I'm walking outside, I'm gripped with fear, terrified I might see the woman with the red umbrella again. I have a close friend I grew up with, and even now we stay in touch. Every year, we meet up once or twice to catch up on each other's lives. Some time ago, she went through a breakup with her boyfriend after several years of dating, but about a year later, they got back together. However, not long after that, they broke up again. Recently, when I asked her about this relationship, she opened up and told me the whole story. When she and her boyfriend first broke up, she was devastated, crying alone every night. On several occasions, when she closed her eyes to sleep, she would see vivid images of her boyfriend lying in bed with another woman. This led her to believe that he had probably moved on and found a new girlfriend. As time went on, things got worse. She started having recurring dreams of these scenes. It drove her to the brink of madness, and she began to worry that she was losing her mind. However, as these images became more frequent, she started to develop a deep resentment toward the woman in her visions. In her dreams, she found herself slowly approaching the woman who was sleeping next to her boyfriend. When I asked what the woman looked like, she said she didn't know. She could never see her face clearly. But night after night, in her dreams, she got closer and closer to this mysterious figure. Then, one night, she dreamed she was standing right beside the woman. In that dream, consumed by rage, she strangled the woman until she collapsed, lifeless and unconscious. The dream terrified her. But after that night, for some reason, those dreams stopped. By a twist of fate, she and her boyfriend ended up getting back together shortly afterward. I asked her, "You've said before that getting back together was really tough. Was this breakup for the same reasons as before?" She replied, "That was part of it, but there was something even more terrifying." She explained that after they reconciled, whenever she stayed over at her boyfriend's place, she would see a ghostly female figure appear in the room in the middle of the night. Each time this figure appeared, it would slowly approach her. She was paralyzed with fear, unable to move, while her boyfriend, sleeping soundly beside her, never noticed a thing. Then, one night, the figure appeared again, and this time, it came close enough for her to see its face clearly. When she did, she was gripped by absolute terror. The face of the ghostly woman was identical to her own. In that moment, she realized it wasn't a ghost at all. It was herself, or rather, a manifestation of her during that period of madness after the first breakup. She remembered the dreams from before, and a wave of horror washed over her. In those dreams, she had strangled the woman in the bed. Now, she understood that the woman was a reflection of herself. Terrified by the realization, she decided to break up with her boyfriend immediately before she could succeed in harming herself. She believed that if she hadn't ended the relationship, she might have been driven to destroy herself. Once upon a time, there was a man who lived a monotonous and difficult life. At home, his wife constantly complained that he didn't earn enough money. His children treated him poorly as well. His son openly showed contempt, while his daughter even found him repulsive, calling him a bald, disgusting old man. It wouldn't be an exaggeration to say that his status in the household was lower than that of the family's little dog. At his workplace, he felt like a machine, endlessly repeating tedious and seemingly meaningless tasks day after day. He was frequently targeted and tormented by his detestable boss over trivial matters. Every day, he interacted with many people, and while some appeared friendly to him, their kindness felt superficial and insincere. In truth, he had no real friends. And so he rode the train to work each day, living a life filled with quiet suffering. Amid those exhausting, draining days, he found solace in taking short naps on the train. For him, sitting in a warm corner of the train car and dozing off was a simple yet sweet moment of happiness. One day, as he drifted into a light sleep on the train, he dreamt that the train had arrived at a place called Sobetsu. The name struck him as odd because he had never heard of it before. Yet, the place felt strangely warm and comforting. As his life grew increasingly burdensome, he began to dream of the train passing through this place called Sobetsu every morning during his naps on the commute. But in reality, no matter how hard he searched, he couldn't find any administrative district or train station named Suibetsu on any map. His curiosity about this mysterious place grew stronger. One day, while dozing on the train again, he suddenly woke up. To his astonishment, the train was stopped at a station called Suibetsu. Though it was during his morning commute, he couldn't suppress his curiosity. Overcome with a sense of urgency, he decided to get off the train to explore. After stepping onto the platform, he encountered many passers-by, all of whom greeted him with warm smiles. To him, this place felt like a cozy, welcoming home. As he wandered around the station, he came across a toy store selling the very toys he had longed for as a child. Nearby, there was a ramen shop serving noodles that tasted exactly like the ones he used to eat when he was young. He spent a truly joyful and relaxing day in this mysterious realm called Suibetsu, forgetting all his troubles and basking in a sense of peace he hadn't felt in years. Later, he found himself by a quiet riverbank. He lay down on the soft grass, gazing up at the sky. A gentle breeze brushed over him, filling his entire body with a refreshing sense of calm. He closed his eyes, savoring the moment. But the instant he did, he woke up from the dream. He was back on the train, and the harsh reality of his stifling, painful life came rushing back. Disappointed to return to his grim reality, he glanced out the train window. To his shock, the train seemed to be passing a station labeled Suibetsu. Overwhelmed with surprise and a desperate longing, he thought, "I want to go there. I need to go there." He stood up abruptly, muttering to himself, "I want to go there. I want to go there." Driven by an almost primal urge, he moved toward the train door and, with a forceful tug, opened it. Amid the screams of startled passengers, the man vanished without a trace before their eyes. Later, police and mortuary staff gathered at the scene of the man's death to handle his belongings and body. Next to the train tracks at the site, there was a newly built wall, constructed just a few months prior. Hanging on the wall was a billboard. The billboard read, "Sobetsu Cemetery. Burial plots now for sale." Ever since I was a child, I've frequently experienced reverse dreams. For example, if I dreamed of losing my wallet, in reality, I'd suddenly come into some unexpected money. If I dream of getting married, I'd end up being dumped by my partner. These reverse dreams worked like that. A pleasant dream would lead to a bad outcome in reality, while a bad dream would turn into something good. And these things actually happened. One day, however, I had a dream that I gave birth to a child. For me, someone who had recently gotten married, if this were to come true, it would be an incredibly joyful event. But based on my experience, I only ever had reverse dreams. So I couldn't help but wonder, did this dream mean that, in reality, I wouldn't be able to have a child? This thought filled me with overwhelming disappointment. Yet, a few months later, I found out I was pregnant. Knowing that my reverse dreams always came true, I became extremely cautious to protect myself and the baby growing inside me. After 10 months, a healthy baby boy was born safely. I was overjoyed, thinking to myself, maybe that dream wasn't a reverse dream after all. It was a straightforward one. But soon after giving birth, My baby cried day and night, constantly wanting to nurse. I understood that this was just a transitional phase that lasts a few months, something every parent goes through. Still, the prolonged lack of sleep left me mentally and physically exhausted. I was suffering from a kind of nervous exhaustion during the early stages of motherhood, and it caused me to feel distressed every single day. To make matters worse, I had married into a remote, insular rural area. There, I had no family, friends, or acquaintances to turn to for advice or support. My husband, busy with work, often came home late, which only accelerated my mental and emotional decline. Then, one day, overwhelmed by my baby's incessant crying, I completely broke down. When I regained my senses and clarity, I looked at my child and saw that he was no longer himself. He was lifeless, his tiny body distorted. I couldn't believe what had happened. I fled to a corner, sobbing uncontrollably, until my husband came home and found me. He called the police. It was then that I finally understood. The reverse meaning of my dream about giving birth wasn't that the child wouldn't be born. It was that the child would ultimately die. Recently, while confined in a hospital behind iron bars, I started having the same recurring dream. In it, I see small meteorites falling from space to Earth. From those meteorites, human beings are continuously born. What does this dream mean? Honestly, I don't know. But I can't help thinking that if, in my reverse dreams, birth signifies death, then perhaps I can guess part of its meaning. One thing is certain, my reverse dreams have never had an exception. So the dream I'm having now will likely, in the not-too-distant future, manifest in reality as another reverse dream. This is a story about my younger brother. Our family consisted of 3 brothers. My younger brother was 4 years younger than me. At the time, he was in 4th grade, I was in 8th grade, and our older brother was in 10th grade. Our older brother lived in the school dormitory, so he rarely came home. As for me, I was part of the track team, which meant I woke up early every morning to go for a run. I still remember it was a spring day when I got up early as usual. After waking up, I noticed that my younger brother, who should have been sleeping in the bed below mine, wasn't there. I figured he'd gone to the bathroom, so I didn't think much of it and headed out for my run. When I stepped outside, I found him asleep on the ground just outside the house. I woke him up and then went for my run. Looking back now, that situation was actually a bit strange. From that day on, whenever I woke up in the morning, I often found my younger brother missing from his bed. I'd always find him somewhere else in the house. Though he wasn't sleeping outside like that first time, the places I found him were oddly secluded, under the table or inside the wardrobe, for instance. This year, during the Lunar New Year, as my family gathered and chatted about old times, my mother mentioned that all 3 of us brothers had a history of sleepwalking. I had no idea I'd ever sleepwalked, nor did I know our older brother did too. It was the first time I'd heard about it. But her words jogged a memory, something that felt a little unsettling. So, when I got a moment alone with my older brother in the room, I brought it up. I asked him, "Did you ever have the same recurring dream when you were younger?" A dream about playing hide and seek. He thought for a moment and said, "Now that you mention it, I think I did have that dream a few times when I was in elementary school." I pressed further, my heart starting to race. "In those dreams, was the person you were playing hide and seek with a little girl?" He froze, looking at me with a hint of surprise, then nodded. I swallowed hard, my nerves building, and continued, "Do you remember if that girl in the dream ever invited you to go play somewhere else?" He replied, "Yeah, I remember. She asked me to go play by the river, but I refused." I took a deep breath and said, "I refused her too. But after you refused, did she say anything to you?" What my brother said next matched exactly what I'd been thinking. He said the girl in the dream told him, "Fine, I'll go play with your younger brother instead." And after he refused her, he never had that dream again. As we talked, goosebumps spread across my body. My brother and I had shared ascended, had the same dream. And the most terrifying part was that, just like him, after I refused the girl in the dream, I never saw her again either. When I shared my thoughts with my brother, we both felt a chill run down our spines. The truth is, next month is the anniversary of my younger brother's passing. 13 years ago, on a morning like any other, I got up early and went for my run. When I returned to the alley leading to our house, I saw an ambulance parked in front of our home. While I was out running, my mother had found my younger brother in his bed, wrapped in his blanket, but his body had already gone cold. He had passed away suddenly. I don't know if he had the same dream as my older brother and me. I don't know if he accepted that girl's invitation to play by the river in his dream, or if it was simply heart failure. All I know is that the dream has become a secret buried deep in my heart and my older brother's, a secret we can never let our parents know. More than 10 years ago, one day while I was flipping through a magazine aimed at high school students preparing for university entrance exams, I came across an intriguing headline in the reader submission section. The title read, "How to Freely Experience a Horrifying Nightmare." Curious, I started reading the article. It explained that if you wanted to have a terrifying dream, you should step on your pillow a few times before going to bed. The number of times you stepped on the pillow would determine the intensity of the nightmare. The highest level of terror was grade 10. If you only stepped on the pillow once or twice, the dream will be mild, like a haunted house at an amusement park. But if you stepped on it more than 7 times, the nightmare would become utterly terrifying. After reading the article, I found it fascinating. Since I was about to go to bed anyway, I decided to give it a try. However, jumping straight to the highest level of nightmare seemed like it might make things boring later on. So I stepped on my pillow 9 times, then lay down and went to sleep. That night, I did have a dream. In it, I was taking care of my grandfather, who was supposed to have passed away long ago. He was lying in my bed, his nose and arms connected to a tangle of medical tubes. In the dream, I dreaded being alone with him. When the rest of the family was around, he always wore a wide, cheerful grin, but when it was just the two of us, his face turned deathly pale, and he would stare at me intensely, muttering something in a low, guttural voice. It made me deeply uncomfortable. In the dream, I pretended to care for him, but secretly, I pulled one of the tubes out of his body. As a result, his condition suddenly worsened. The family rushed into the room, frantic with worry. My grandfather's face remained as pale as ever, and he continued coughing and muttering in that low, eerie voice. I was overwhelmed with panic and fear. I realized I had done something unforgivable, something catastrophic. My grandfather was dying, and I thought that if anyone found out I was responsible, my life would be over. So I acted clueless, rushing to his side to check on him. That's when I clearly heard what he was muttering. His eyes bulged as he stared at me, his mouth repeating over and over, "Go to hell." I jolted awake, my heart pounding. Terrified, I thought to myself, was that a grade 9 nightmare? That dream was so strange. My grandfather died before I was even born. And taking care of him in my room? That's absurd. He would never say something like that. But there was something off about his face, something strange. I tried to dismiss it, thinking, it's just a dream. But as I tried to shake it off, something felt wrong, like a lingering sense of unease. It was as if the dream hadn't fully ended. Suddenly, I sensed a gaze coming from the ceiling. I immediately looked up. There on the ceiling was a massive pale green face. It was the same eerie face of my grandfather from the dream. But now he wasn't muttering in a low voice anymore. He was shouting at me, his voice booming, "Go to hell." I was so terrified I nearly wet myself. I couldn't believe that face had followed me out of the dream. The horror was so overwhelming that I blacked out. When I came to, the face was gone. For the next few days, the memory of that green face left me shaken and restless. I kept thinking, if a grade 9 nightmare was that grotesque and terrifying, what would a grade 10 nightmare be like? Though I was curious, I never tried the method again. I couldn't bear the thought of seeing that horrifying green face once more. But there was something else that unnerved me. Later, I read the next issue of the magazine, and in the reader's submission section, there was a response to the previous article. It read, "I tried the method for experiencing a horrifying nightmare from last month's issue. Since I don't like things that are too scary, I stepped on my pillow 8 times before going to bed. Though I don't remember the full details of the dream, when I woke up, I saw a massive, terrifying green face on my bedroom ceiling. It was truly horrifying. Reading that response sent shivers down my spine. A complete stranger had seen the same massive green face as I had. I began to wonder if the method was some kind of sinister curse or a ritual that connected you to something unnatural. And what would a grade 10 nightmare look like? I've always been a skeptic when it comes to supernatural things, ghosts, hauntings, or any of that mystical nonsense. I'd usually just roll my eyes and dismiss it all. But what happened in our vacation home in Shikoku completely changed my perspective. I'm still trying to make sense of it all. My name is Takeshi Tanaka. My wife, Akari, and I bought a lake house about 3 years ago as a family retreat. We live in Tokyo, and the harsh winters there were really wearing us down. We'd always dreamed of having a place to escape to during the colder months. Plus, our son Kenji loves fishing and swimming, so a house by the lake seemed perfect. Surprisingly, the house was quite affordable for how beautiful it was. It had 4 bedrooms, a dock stretching out into the lake, and nearly 2 acres of forested land. It sits on Lake Biwa, which the real estate agent told us was once part of a vast waterway system used by indigenous people for travel centuries ago. That historical tidbit sounded interesting, but I didn't think much of it at the time. Our first weekend there was perfect. We cleaned, explored the house, and Kenji immediately set off to hunt for lizards and interesting rocks, like any curious 11-year-old would. We grilled meat on the porch, watched the sunset over the lake, and fell asleep to the sounds of cicadas and frogs. Everything felt completely normal. But during our second visit, about a month later, things started to get strange. One afternoon, Kenji came running into the house, clutching something tightly in his hand. "Dad, look what I found by the big oak tree," he exclaimed. He opened his palm to reveal what looked like a stone arrowhead. It was about 5 centimeters long, perfectly crafted with a sharp tip and a notched base. "That's awesome, buddy," I said, examining it closely. "It looks like an ancient Jaman artifact." Over the next few days, Kenji found 3 more arrowheads and a small blue glass bead. Curious about his discoveries, I did some online research and learned that blue glass beads were often traded by Western explorers with indigenous tribes in Japan during the 16th century. That's when I decided to dig deeper into the history of our property. I visited the prefecture's historical society and discovered that our lake house sat on land once belonging to the Ainu, an indigenous group. According to records, they had a significant settlement around the lake until a smallpox epidemic decimated their population after contact with Westerners in the 1500s. I found this fascinating, but didn't dwell on it. That is, until that evening. I was rummaging through the shed for fishing gear when I heard voices. Not ambient noise or the wind, but actual human voices having a conversation. They were muffled, like people talking in the next room, but unmistakably human. I called out, thinking maybe Akari and Kenji had come outside, but there was no response. When I walked back into the house, I found both Akari and Kenji passed out on the sofa, watching a movie. "Were you guys just in the shed?" I asked. "No, we've been here for an hour," Akari replied, giving me a puzzled look. I brushed it off, convincing myself it was my imagination or perhaps sounds carrying from a neighbor's house. But the next morning, while I was out grocery shopping, Akari had a similar experience. "I heard people talking in the kitchen," she told me when I returned. "I thought you'd come back early." It sounded like a man and a woman chatting, but when I checked, no one was there. We laughed it off nervously, blaming it on the house settling or sounds echoing across the lake. Old houses make weird noises, right? But then things escalated. During dinner that evening, a framed photo suddenly flew off the wall. It didn't just fall. It launched across the room as if someone had picked it up and thrown it. It landed about 2 meters from the wall, miraculously unbroken. We all sat there, chopsticks frozen in midair, staring at the photo on the floor. "Maybe it wasn't hung properly," I suggested, though even I didn't buy that explanation. That night, I woke up around 3 a.m., feeling uneasy. As I turned to check on Akari beside me, I noticed something on the floor. A small puddle of water, the size and shape of an adult's footprint, sat in the middle of our bedroom rug. I got up to investigate, thinking the ceiling might be leaking, but it was bone dry. There were no pipes in that part of the house. The puddle was just there, perfectly formed, not spreading or soaking into the rug. I touched it. It was definitely wet, then grabbed a towel to wipe it up. By morning, I convinced myself I'd imagined it all, until it happened again the next night. And the night after that, always in the same spot, always the same size and shape, always around 3 a.m. For our third visit to the lake house, we invited my brother and his wife to join us. We didn't mention any of the strange occurrences, partly because we didn't want to sound crazy, and partly because nothing had happened for a few weeks, so we thought whatever it was had passed. We were having coffee on the porch when my sister-in-law, Yumi, suddenly froze, staring into the house through the sliding glass door. "Who's that man inside?" she asked casually. We all turned to look, but no one was there. "What man?" I asked. "The Ainu man who was just standing in your living room," she said, as if it were the most normal thing in the world. "He had long black hair and some kind of mask. I thought he was a local or something." My brother laughed. "Yumi, there's no one in there." But Akari and I exchanged a glance. We hadn't told them about the voices, the watery footprints, or the flying objects. That night, I finally spilled everything to my brother over beers by the fire. He's always been the rational one, an engineer who needs logical explanations for everything. "Takashi, old houses make strange noises," he said predictably. "The photo probably fell because of a loose nail in the water. You probably spilled something before bed and didn't notice. What about what Yumi saw?" I pressed. He hesitated. "She's been into spiritual stuff lately, reading about auras and energies. It's probably just her imagination." But the next morning, my pragmatic engineer brother wasn't so sure anymore. He came to breakfast looking like he hadn't slept. "Last night, I heard people talking," he admitted reluctantly. "It sounded like they were right outside our bedroom door." I got up to check, but the hallway was empty. We cut that visit short. My brother and Yumi left that afternoon, and we followed the next day. We didn't talk about what happened, but there was an unspoken agreement that something was off with the house. During the 3-hour drive home, Kenji spoke up from the back seat. "Dad, who are the people at the lake house?" My hands tightened on the steering wheel. "What people, buddy?" "The ones who watch us. The ones who sometimes touch my hair when I'm trying to sleep." I nearly swerved off the road. Akari turned to face him. "Kenji, why didn't you tell us about this sooner?" He shrugged. "I thought you guys knew they were there. You talk to them sometimes too." "We do?" I asked, my mouth dry. "Yeah, when you're asleep. I hear you talking to them in a different language." We didn't return to the lake house for nearly 2 months after that conversation. I spent a lot of time researching the area's history and the Ainu people. Apparently, they believe bodies of water serve as gateways between the world of the living and the spirit world. The lake our house sits on was considered especially sacred due to its unusual depth and connection to other waterway systems. When we finally returned to the house, we approached it differently. Instead of fearing the possibility of spirits, we decided to treat the situation with respect. If this land was once sacred to the Ainu, maybe acknowledging that would make a difference. The watery footprints continued to appear, always in the same spot, always at the same time. But now, instead of wiping them away, I'd simply say, "Good evening," before going back to sleep. The voices in the shed and kitchen carried on with their muffled conversations. Objects still moved occasionally, but not in a threatening way. A book would slide off a shelf, and we'd find it open to a page about Japan's indigenous history. The TV would turn on by itself to a documentary about Ainu culture. Our neighbors thought we were nuts when we casually mentioned some of these events. That old Tanaka lake house has always had strange stories attached to it. Our neighbor, Mr. Sato, said, "Previous owners never stayed long. You guys have lasted longer than most." One night, about 6 months after our first strange experience, I woke up to find not just the usual watery footprint on the floor, but a trail leading from our bedroom to Kenji's room. I followed it, my heart pounding, and found Kenji sitting up in bed, chatting animatedly to an empty corner of his room. "Kenji," I whispered from the doorway. "Who are you talking to?" He turned to me, completely unafraid. "The lake people, Dad. They're showing me how they used to make canoes." I should have been terrified, but his calmness reassured me. What are they saying? They're not mad at us for living here, he said simply. They just want us to remember them. They say this has been their home for thousands of years, and they don't want to be forgotten. The watery footprints began to evaporate as I stood there, disappearing one by one until only the original footprint in our bedroom remained. The next day, our family decided to create a small memorial in the yard for the Ainu. We gathered the arrowheads Kenji had found and placed them on a flat stone by the lake, along with the blue trade bead. Kenji insisted on adding a small bowl of water beside it. That night, for the first time since we'd owned a house, the watery footprint didn't appear in our bedroom. Instead, we woke up to find the bowl of water at the memorial completely empty, despite no wind or animals that could have spilled it. We've owned the lake house for 3 years now. The strange occurrences still happen, but they become part of our experience there rather than something to fear. Sometimes we catch glimpses of shadowy figures moving at the edge of our vision. The voices in the shed and kitchen continue their mumbled conversations. Objects still shift on their own, but the atmosphere no longer feels menacing. It feels alive with history, as if our vacation home exists in a place where the past and present overlap, where the veil between worlds has grown thin over centuries. Last weekend, we hosted a small gathering at the lake house with a few close friends. We hadn't told them about our experiences, wanting to see if they'd notice anything unusual on their own. As we sat around the fire pit after dinner, my friend Hiroshi suddenly pointed toward the lake. "Did you guys just see that? Someone was standing on your dock." Instead of denying it or making excuses, I simply said, "This land has a long history. Sometimes we get visitors from the past." To my surprise, no one laughed or looked at me like I was crazy. Instead, there were thoughtful nods and a few confessions about their own inexplicable experiences. As we cleaned up after the guests left, Akari found something on the memorial stone we'd created. Next to Kenji's collection of arrowheads was a perfectly preserved flower, one I'd never seen before. When I looked it up later, I discovered it was a species that went extinct in Japan nearly 300 years ago. The watery footprint appeared again that night for the first time in months. But this time, it wasn't alone. A trail of footprints led from our bedroom, through the living room, and out toward the memorial by the lake. They vanished at the water's edge as if whoever, or whatever, left them had simply walked into the lake and disappeared. I still don't know exactly what's happening in our lake house. I don't know if we're experiencing spirits, some kind of time slip, or something else entirely. All I know is that our vacation home in Shikoku sits on land where the boundary between the past and present, between this world and whatever comes next, isn't as solid as we'd like to believe. The Ainu haven't left. Maybe they can't. Or maybe they simply don't want to be forgotten. Either way, we've learned to coexist with them, to respect their continued presence on the land they called home long before we arrived. Sometimes, I think about selling the house and finding a vacation home with less complicated energy. But then I remember what Kenji said after talking to the lake people that night. They're not mad at us, Dad. They just want us to remember them. And somehow remembering seems like the least we can do.